Sanctuary, I will introduce myself. Good morning. I'm Reverend Michelle Scott-Huffman. My pronouns are she and her. I am a middle-aged woman with salt and pepper, mostly salt hair, that's a little short and spiky, and wearing gray pants and the same maroon jacket as Roberta. So I mean, we might as well just name it now, right? So so glad to be here with you today. So this month at First UU, we're doing a deep dive into our heritage. Depending on which conversations you're a part of, and there are many, that might mean our Unitarian Universalist heritage. It might mean our First UU heritage, our family or community heritage, or even the heritage that connects us to some of our own intellectual or spiritual ancestors. The mantra for this month that you may have seen on that whiteboard in the back where it's not currently written because the Youth Covenant is there from yesterday, says, "I carry the strengths of my ancestors." In some of the conversations that I've had this month, I've seen some folks get a little tripped up because there are parts and pieces of their ancestral heritage that they definitely didn't want to carry forward. I'd say that's true for all of us. And yet, even the learnings from the failures of our history have helped us all to become who we are today and who we are yet becoming. Hear me when I say that doesn't excuse any of the atrocities in our history or absolve us of responsibility to make amends. It's just a nod to the reality that all of our histories have histories. This month's Soul Matters small group packet introduction, and this is a shameless plug for everyone's enthusiastic participation in a Soul Matters small group, tells us that there's a big difference between relatives and ancestors. Relatives give us our brown eyes and bowed legs. Ancestors bestow a legacy. Relatives are those we tell stories about. Ancestors call us to carry stories forward. Relatives live on in our DNA. Ancestors live in the whispers of our hearts. Our relatives allowed us to be here. Our ancestors tell us why we are here. The difference comes down to values. Values we use to construct not just our stories, but ourselves. Another way to put this is to say that ancestors remind us that we are a part of something larger, even obligated to something larger. Because as much as we need these larger webs and stories, they need us too. So last week we talked in depth about some of our Unitarian ancestors, William Ellery Channing, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Theodore Parker, referred to by one author as the three prophets of liberal religion. Earl Wilbur, an early historian of Unitarianism, notes three recurring trends in the Unitarian half of our history: freedom of religious thought, the unrestricted use of reason, and tolerance of different views and practices. You may be thinking, but wait, the title of this message includes the words freedom, reason, hope, and courage. Or maybe you're not because you have no idea what the title of this message is. But it was in the email. That cluster of words comes from the proposed revision to Article 2 of our UUA bylaws, where it says in the section entitled Values and Covenant, as Unitarian Universalists, we covenant congregation to congregation and through our association to support and assist one another in our ministries. We draw from our heritages of freedom, reason, hope, and courage, building on the foundation of love. Now, I think we can easily extract proof of hope and courage from what we heard last week of those three foundational Unitarian sermons, and they were men who preached them and then backed up the ideas shared in them in probably some difficult conversations with many of their colleagues, friends, and family. But in order to dig into the Universalist half of our heritage, We'll look there today for other examples of hope and courage. Indeed, they abound in both streams. In fact, Reverend Dr. Carl Gregg has written that perhaps one of the most important trends that eventually helped lay the groundwork for the 1961 consolidation of American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church of America was that both Unitarianism and Universalism began to emphasize hope for social change in this world. The Transcendentalist movement in Unitarianism encouraged its adherents to find religious meaning and experience in all aspects of this world. Think of Emerson's essay, Nature, or Thoreau's essay, Walking. Universalists likewise began to emphasize not only universal salvation in the next world, but universal salvation in this world. The universal community of men and women and the necessity of working toward the secular realization of that community through peace and justice on earth. So the first apologists for apokatastasis, or the return of everything to perfection, i.e. universal salvation, seem to be numerous during the patristic period of Christianity, and be among those we call the early church fathers. These were people like Clement, Origen, Didymus, St. Gregory of Nyssa, and many others writing theology and early Christian doctrine in the 2nd to 4th centuries of the Common Era. Universalism is not such a problem that it was denounced in the earliest of the ecumenical church councils, though. It wasn't until Augustine, or Augustine, however you want to call him, writing in the 5th century, said that it is quite in vain then that some, indeed very many, yield to merely human feelings and deplore the notion of eternal punishment of the damned and their interminable and perpetual misery. That guy, who we can also thank for much of Christianity's backward thinking about sexuality. He must have been such a joy to be around. Anyway, as a majority of today's Christian church doctrine bears out, Augustine somehow won the popularity contest, and his non-universalist beliefs began to win out over the indeed very many universalists of the time. Nevertheless, universalism was not an idea easily squelched. Obviously, there were countless ancestors who carried the idea forward for the next 13 or 1400 years. And that's where we'll skip to today. John Murray, known as the first great apostle of universalism in America, hits the scene around 1770. Murray, a Calvinist preacher in Ireland, eventually made his way to America, but not before he found himself in London and impacted by the 1759 publication there of Union, or a treatise on the consanguinity and affinity between Christ and his church by James Relly. It took a number of years for him to come over to the Universalist side, but once he was there, he became a true evangelist for Universalism. Now, I'll spare you today the story of the beached ship and the providential meeting of Murray and Thomas Potter, who had apparently built a Universalist meeting house out in the woods a decade earlier with no minister to fill its pulpit. He was an early subscriber to the "if you build it, they will come" philosophy, long before Kevin Costner gifted it to us in the movie Field of Dreams. Suffice it to say that Murray did agree to preach a universalist message, and the rest is history or heritage or whatever. If we hadn't seen hope as a part of our heritage, if we hadn't yet seen hope as a part of our heritage, I'd say the shift from, how did Augustine describe it? Yes, the eternal punishment of the damned and their interminable and perpetual misery. To go from that hanging over your head to a belief that all beings are made whole in the end is quite hopeful. The way I often talk about it to students in campus ministry is, what if we just take hell off the table? That changes everything, right? But to move from there even to an understanding of salvation as a way of living here and now is even more liberatory and hopeful. Though I suspect that there were some that thought that kind of hope was naive in the early days of Unitarians and Universalists together. Greg writes, to name one of the stumbling blocks that kept the Unitarians and the Universalists apart before the 1961 consolidation, the Unitarians tended to come from the upper class and the Universalists from the lower class. One classic joke about this economic divide from a 19th century minister, Thomas Starr King, who served in both Unitarian and Universalist settings, was that Universalists think God is too good to damn them forever. Unitarians think they are too good to be damned forever. It sounds like they needed each other. If what I just said was a little ouchy for you, you might want to sit for a while with the reality of classism, which continues to wreak havoc in our communities, but also in our churches. And let's shift to courage. See what I did there? Carl Gregg again writes, indeed, the liberal turn of religion can be seen as the move from authority vested in hierarchy, community, and tradition to authority derived from reason and individual experience. And that's a large part of our inheritance, predecessors who were willing to question entrenched and often unjust hierarchies, the ways that a community can become a tyranny of the majority, and how traditions, even themselves, can prevent progress. So after John Murray, Jose Ballou comes along, excommunicated from the Baptist Church on doctrinal grounds in 1791. He seeks out John Murray and becomes a convert to Universalism. In fact, Ballou took the teachings of Universalism even further than Murray and became known as an ultra-Universalist. We could be the UUUs. As an ultra-Universalist, Ballou rejected the doctrines of the Trinity, which was rare for early Universalists. He rejected Calvin's idea of total depravity, and he rejected the atonement theory of the death of Jesus. This was a whole new theological world being created. Jose Ballou exhibited courage in his shift to Universalist beliefs, and even more so in going further in his beliefs that would have seemed radical to many around him at the time. He's quoted as saying things like, religion which requires persecution to sustain, it is of the devil's propagation. And those who commit injustice bear the greatest burden, and doubt is the incentive to truth, and inquiry leads the way. And so it is that we draw from our heritages of freedom, reason, hope, and courage, building on the foundation of love. Our heritage leads us to naming our values, which leads us then to faithful action to live them out. According to the Article 2 Study Commission that has been engaged in doing the work of articulating a vision of Unitarian Universalism for today, our heritage of freedom, reason, hope, and courage lead us to the values of interdependence, equity, transformation, pluralism, generosity, and justice, all of which are upheld by a foundation of love. So to build on a foundation of love, empowered by our values and informed by our heritage, means to let go of our consumption with the anti-heritage, the thing that our forebears were reacting against, to live fully into the promise of the gift that they gave us instead. You may or may not know that so much of early theological writings within Christianity, the essays were titled "Against This," "Against That." I would like to say that as people of progressive faith, it's time for us to begin to name the things that we are for. because the things that we formed ourselves against are not a part of the formula of who we are, and we don't even need to talk about them. What we do need to talk about is how we live into these values that came out of our heritage. It does no good for the Unitarian to denounce Trinitarianism without being able to express how Unitarianism leads to the oneness and interdependence of all things. It does no good for the Universalists to proclaim that hell is empty, when instead they can shatter the narrative that there even is a hell and lean into the hope of a life of wholeness here and now. It does no good for the humanists to remain stuck in their argument about why some distant God or religion isn't the answer to all of life's questions. We have to move forward to communicate in word and deed the ways that our best human selves offer real solutions to life's challenges. What will be a force for good in the world is our commitment to our heritage of hope for social change in this world, to a desire to find religious meaning and experience in all aspects of this world, and the realization of true community. Through the work of peace and justice, as Carl Gregg wrote of our ancestors in this faith, who carried the strengths of their ancestors and walked forward in the world with those strengths. My hope for all of us today is that we too take our convictions one step further, over and over again, until we look back and barely recognize the place from which we've come. Because the world around us continues to offer more and greater challenges, and we have to move forward with it. May we remember that our heritage has brought us to this place rooted in freedom, reason, hope, and courage, and that heritage calls forth our own response, our own way of living into the values of interconnectedness, equity, transformation, pluralism, generosity, and justice. And even further, the work that we're about to engage in these listening circles to determine what are the first UU values that arise from our own first UU heritage that we want to live out, that connect with our covenanted values with the other UU churches and UUA as a whole. My hope for us is that we can reach back and remember our heritage, that we can make amends for the pieces of it that were harmful, that we don't claim immunity from the impact of our ancestors, but that we lean into reparations and making amends, but also that we lean into the future of where that heritage and those values are taking us. Because, friends, there is work for us to do in the world. And if we come here on Sunday mornings and the purpose of it is not to transform ourselves and to transform the world around us, then what are we doing? I could meet you at IHOP. But instead we come here because the work of this place is calling us to something greater, something bigger. And I hope that we can lean into it together. May it be so for each of us today and in all the days to come. Blessed be, and amen. Before I tell you what the interlude is, I'm going to thoroughly confuse you with some conversation about what we're doing over the next few weeks. So a part of the work that we've been doing, listening to one another as a congregation, recognizing that there are many needs in this place, is we've been experimenting with some different service models. And over the next few weeks, we're going to experiment with a 2-service model. So next week and on November 12th, it is not true on November 5th because we always do Friendly Feast. So on the first Sunday, there's just a single 10 a.m. service. Next week, October 29th and November 12th, there will be a 10 a.m. whole worship service that will be interactive and have small humans moving about the space a little bit and maybe partaking in some of the leadership. And there will also be an 11:15 service. Both of those services will be about 45 minutes. There will be a period of about half an hour in between where we'll all get to mingle together and have some coffee and snacks like we do. There will be religious education at 11:15, as there pretty much always is. So if folks have kiddos and they want the kids to be involved in religious education and they want to sit in the 11:15 service, that's a thing that can be done. There are lots of things that can be done. Next week, the seekers will not meet so that folks in that group can have the opportunity to check out either or both services if they like. So this is a time of experimentation, and it is sure to be confusing. So the good thing is, if you meant to show up for one service, but you showed up early, you're going to catch another service. And I mean, just don't show up at noon. So other than that, you should be okay. Oh, and then there's a time change in a couple of weeks in the midst of all that. The reason that we're doing all this now is because we have a congregational meeting on November 19th, and there's been some conversation about maybe moving a service time, and we would like to experience this 2-service model before that and see if it's something that we want to continue to try, or if we're just talking about the time of 1 service on Sunday mornings. I think that's it. If you have questions, see me afterwards. I probably don't have the answers. The interlude is Come Children of Tomorrow.